Welcome to my new video for CSS Grid. This is the third tutorial in my series, and today I want to show you how to use grid line names. I understand it can be a very difficult concept to understand because for certain grid properties, for instance, the grid template rows or grid template columns, grid rows, grid columns. For these, you can target grid lines using the line numbers, but then you can also use line names. And today I want to simplify this for you in order to ease the process in your future web design projects. So first of all, I want to touch base on the grid line concept itself. And it's a pretty basic concept to understand because it helps you to position and realign grid items on your grid in a very flexible manner. So just to refresh your memory, although this is something that I covered in my last two videos, grid lines, especially in equal square grids, like when it's 2 by 2 or 3 by 3, 4 by 4, etc. Usually you will have on one axis, let's say horizontally, if you have two grid cells, you will usually have three grid lines. So usually you can, a simple formula that you can create for yourself whenever you have an equal grid on all sides, with equal cells. You can just count the number of cells and add +1. So here we have two grid cells, item 1 and item 2 horizontally. And we also have three row grid lines. So the first one before the eye of item, the second one before the eye of item 2 here, and the last one obviously is the right border of the grid itself. So the same applies vertically. We have the first column grid line above item 1 and item 2 right here, the second one in the middle here, and the third one, which is the last grid line. So now that we have these concepts out of the way, I'm going to show you how to write the proper syntax to add grid line names. So here we have two values, this declaration here, grid template columns, 100 by 100 pixels, because we want two columns of 100 pixels each. So assuming we wanted to name this line, the line on the left, we will simply add a square bracket and type the name of the line. All right, so the name doesn't, it's not something that is predefined. You can choose whatever name that you want, but then do not add spaces to your names. You need to add a dash. If your name is made up of multiple words, you need to add a dash symbol. So the syntax is very clear here. This is the Mozilla Developer Network, and I'm on the grid lines page from the glossary section, and you see here what they have. All right, grid templates column. So they also have three columns here, which you can see by one FR here, and then one FR here, and the other one FR, and four lines eventually, like I was telling you. So three columns is going to generate four grid column lines or column grid lines. So here they have square brackets, the name of the line, column 1 starts, because it's two words, col 1 and starts, they have a dash symbol in between. All right, the same applies here, col 2 starts, col 3 starts, and then the ends, cos ends. All right, so we're going to do the same thing here, but then in this video I'm going to show you how you can use multiple names for one grid line, and then I'm going to explain why this is actually necessary to master. All right, why should you even give one line multiple names and not a single one? So first of all, I'm going to have let's call it line 1, something very easy. This is going to be the left line here. Then here I'm going to have line 2 for this middle line, and remember we're dealing with the column section. All right, so you should look at the column grid lines, the vertical lines if you want. So now line number 3, I'm going to call it line 3, and I'm going to close it here. It's still the same, it doesn't change anything. So as an example, if you want to see how it works, I'm going to target this item 1 here, and I'm going to stretch it for it to cover the entire row. All right, so it's going to stretch till the end of item 2, and while she's doing that, it's going to push item 2 down here. Okay, so usually if you check the last video, I showed you how to use the grid column property. All right, it's very easy. You just type grid column, and then you specify where you want the item to start and where you want it to end. So first of all, let's target here item number 1, which is item 1 here, and I'm gonna apply this styling to it. So item number 1, grid column, so it should start at the first line as it's doing now, but end on the third one. Okay, so you can see that now it stretches as we expected it to. But let's say I don't want to use the numbers, I want to use the lines. So now I'm going to say here line 1 and ends at line 3. It does the same thing because the grid now knows that line 1 corresponds to this line and line 3 corresponds to that line. So when you use line names, keep in mind that you are not deactivating the default feature that grid column. Grid column normally accepts numbers. So even if you use names, it will still accept numbers. This is why if you write this, it still works. All right, but you just have the option to use grid line names if it helps you to better organize your grid. So again, line 3, line 1. And be careful not to misspell your line names, because if I was to let's say omit the I, I'm gonna get a messed up layout. All right, so the same thing applies here. Let's say I just wrote line without anything, it's gonna mess up. It doesn't know where to start because line is not a standard value for the grid column property. So because it's a defined name, a name that we've chosen ourselves, we need to make sure that the way we type it is actually correct. So now I'm gonna have a more complex layout, which is gonna justify the use of multiple names for a single grid line. In this case, I'm gonna go to the previous code I wrote for the last video where we generated this content here. It was a basic website layout, and in this video I was showing you how to use the grid column and grid row shorthand properties. I recommend you check this video if you don't know how to use it, and maybe also the very first tutorial where I showed you how to use the longer properties, to generate the same results. So anyway, today we're talking about grid line names. So let's do this. I'm gonna use the same HTML as well. Oops. Okay, so here we're gonna have the same results as the previous video. Okay, but then this time around we don't want to use the numbers, this syntax. Okay, we want to use the names. So what I'm gonna do in the first place, whilst I'm defining the structure of my grid on the container right here, I'm gonna add the names. So this line, for instance, it's the beginning of the grid. Obviously, it's on the left of the header, navigation, the article section, comments, related post, sponsored, and footer. But then whenever you use grid line names, I recommend you have a proper name structure in mind, okay, so that you don't have to always refer to your grid structure here and check what name did I use. Okay, so in this video I'm going to do something very simple. I'm going to have the name of the section, then a dash symbol, and then starts if it's at the beginning. If it's at the end, I'm going to use end. So for instance, I'm going to have header starts for this line and header ends for this line. So in this case, whenever I'm here, it could also be called article start, article end, but then that's not a very good example to show you, right? Because that's one grid line spanning across multiple rows. Okay, so I just said that so that you get an idea why you don't necessarily need to have multiple names for such grid lines. It doesn't really make sense, right? Header start will be the same as navigation start right here. It's one vertical grid line, so just give it one name. However, for the rows, it makes a lot of sense to give them multiple names, because in this case, this line, for instance, separates the header from the navigation. So it determines the start of the navigation and at the same time the end of the header section. So we can call this line, for instance, header ends, and at the same time nav starts. Same thing, we can call this line nav ends, and at the same time article starts. So you get the idea here: article ends, comment start, and so on. This vertical line, however, can have double names, because in this case it's the beginning of the sidebar here, and it's also the end of this main column containing the article, comments, related posts, and sponsored contents. So this vertical line can have two names. Alright, let's get to the code now. For the column, I'm gonna have a very simple name, sites left, because it's on the left. Probably I'm gonna call it column. Okay, let's just call it column name. I'm gonna give it a single name, that's all. And right, so site left is going to be the name of this grid, and I didn't take this into consideration because related posts, we're actually dealing with 3 columns here. All right, these grid items are simply stretching 2 columns. So in actual fact, we can have column 1 ends, column 2 start. So 2 names, column 2 ends, and let's name it sidebar starts. So in this case, we're targeting this vertical grid line here. And lastly, the end here, we can just call it site right. Okay, so let's see in the first place if this actually works. So remember the names: column 1 ends, column 2 starts, column 2 ends, sidebar starts. So I'm gonna check if the article section, for instance, still stretches with the comment section if we use the grid line names instead of the grid numbers. So article contents is item 3, comment section is item 4, these guys right here. So item 3 and 4 and 8, the sponsored contents, all stretch in the same manner. They span across 2 columns. So in this case, I'm gonna have here site starts. I think that was the correct name, right? Oh, site left. All right. So site left, and then here we had column 2 end or sidebar start. It doesn't matter. We can use whichever name we want. It still works. It still does the same thing. And here I could also use, if I wanted, column 2 ends. Okay, so now we're more familiar with this. Let's do the same thing for the rows. So I'm going to start with this time around I'm going to name it site top, maybe, for this first line, and at the same time header start. This is mainly to get you familiar with multiple names for a single grid, a single row grid line. So here header ends, I'm defining this second line here. So header end is also nav start. We can do the same thing here, nav ends, and then article starts. This is the third line right here. So now let's target this fourth line here, which is also the end of the article section and the beginning of the comment section. So we can have article ends and then comments, okay, without s, just comments start. The same thing here, comment ends, and then related start, then related ends and sponsored start. Now here's the tricky part here. This last line is the end of the sponsored contents and also the end of the sidebar and also the beginning of the footer. So in this case, we can even use three names if we want, just to have more choices, when we want to target this line. So you can have sponsor ends, you can have sidebar ends, and then footer start right here. The same thing here, you can have footer ends and then site bottom, because here we had site top, okay, this part right here. So here it only makes sense that we have site bottom. Again, let's check where we use the grid row properties, and let's use our names now. So item 5 is the sidebar right here. We don't need to count anymore, okay, which line we want it to start. We only know we want it to start at the end of the navigation section and go all the way to the beginning of the footer. So in this case, we can simply remove this here and have, let me stretch this up so that you can see the live changes I'm doing a bit more. Okay, so now, yep, now I'm going to have nav ends slash footer starts, and it does the same thing as when we use the line numbers. So it looks like in these layouts we only use the grid row property once. I can see that I did not use the line names for this section here, so let's do that. Item 1, 2, and 9, these are the header right here, the navigation, and the footer. So we want these to stretch from site left to site right. These are the names we gave to our first and last vertical lines. So in this case, site left. And by the way, this is a very interesting thing. You can use a combination of line names and line numbers. So here it still works because site left, it knows that I'm targeting this one, and number 4 is also this line. So long as it recognizes the grid line you're targeting, it doesn't matter if you're using names or numbers, both will work even together. But for consistency purposes, I prefer that we use only names for a particular declaration or only numbers, but eventually it's up to you. So here I'm going to have sites and sites right, that was, and it does the same thing. So let's change this section as well. Item 5 is the sidebar right here. We don't even need to count which column or whatever. We already know that this is column 2 and then sites right for the sidebar. And just in case, I don't know, you just fast forwarded the video or something for some reason, the names, I'm not guessing them, I'm using the exact names I defined here at the top when I was defining my grids. And these rules, these declarations were applied on the container, which is actually the parent elements here containing all the grid items. Okay, so I think we've gotten rid of the line numbers now, and we're only using line names. So you see how convenient it is. One line can have multiple names, and then the names can be used together with the numbers, the line numbers. Okay, you don't need to do any more counting or whatever, because let's say you have a more complex layout, with ads, social media icons, voting icons, links, etc., etc., and all these occupy their own they are assigned their own grid item, you're going to have so many rows and so many columns, it's going to be hectic eventually to count all of them. So just give them names that you can follow actually. And I recommend a proper naming structure, just like I did here. We have nav end, footer start, etc. So that on the fly you can just name these lines, target them, and realign, reposition, and order your elements to to your own, at your own discretion. And it's really fast. It does not bloat the file too much. Obviously, you don't have to use 3-line names like I did here, one is fine, two is also acceptable, but this was just an example. You can go above three, it's up to you. All right. So in the next video, I'm going to try and target something that I think is fundamental again to your knowledge as a web designer, getting introduced to CSS Grid. So until then, let me know what you think of this video. Please go ahead and watch my previous videos, leave some feedback, questions, anything, critiques. Of course, please subscribe to this channel for more content, because this is a special CSS Grid tutorial series, and I'm gonna have more on this. So please share this video, give it a thumbs up, and until we meet again, have a great day, great week, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.